Hello there, I'm Caleb, and this is my cave. Today I'm going to be starting a new series on the channel that I would like to call Shelf Spotlight, and today I'm going to be starting with one of my favorite shelves in my display, that being the Flashes and Lanterns display. With that being said, let's get started. What I'm going to be doing throughout this Shelf Spotlight series is taking down each figure of the shelf, going through them individually about what I like, what I don't like, how I think they could have been executed better potentially, and then we'll make a full shelf again. First up is the McFarlane DC Multiverse comic book Jon Stewart. And when it comes to McFarlane Multiverse, I'm of two minds about the over-stylization of everything. For Green Lanterns, it does feel like it's a bit much, given that their costumes in the comics are just straight green and straight black, flat, no panel lines over anything. For Jon Stewart, it's not that big a deal to me. He is one of my favorite characters in DC and by far my favorite Green Lantern overall. So it doesn't bother me that much. Plus, he's a military type guy, U.S. Marine veteran. So it makes sense that he'd be more meticulous with his costume. He'd make it more armor-like, just for extra protection. So that's the McFarlane Multiverse Jon Stewart. Next up is the first release of McFarlane's Kyle Rayner. This is the more like baby poop green, I guess you'd call it. Definitely not my favorite iteration of Kyle that they've done. I've yet to open the Kyle Rayner from the Kyle and Kilowog 2-pack, and I don't have the other one, the one that's in the more classic style but weird colors. So this is nice for what it is now, but I can't wait to get the Kyle and Kilowog 2-pack open and get that on the shelf. Next up is another Kyle. This is the Mattel DC Universe Classics Blue Lantern Kyle. Now, when it comes to comic book and comic book movie-based figures, I'm not a huge stickler when it comes to scale. I keep DC Universe Classics, McFarlane Multiverse, Mattel Multiverse, and DC Direct all in the same shelves, all in the same displays. And that's just due to artists draw characters differently. So in different issues, they're going to appear larger, smaller. Different actors play the same characters, and those actors are different sizes. So scale isn't a big deal to me when it comes to comics. As we move further in this series, and we get to the Star Wars shelves, scale is a bigger deal to me there. Just because actors are pretty consistent across Star Wars, and but when it comes to comics, not that big a deal. As for this Kyle right here, I do really like the royal blue, the Blue Lanterns that they give. Really wish I had a Saint Walker figure to go with it, but that may come in time. And the last figure on the back row of this shelf is the McFarlane Multiverse DC Animated Universe Jon Stewart. And this figure really disappointed me. I'm a huge fan of the DCAU and Justice League Unlimited specifically. The likeness to John in the show is not that great. I don't think the skin tone is right. I don't think the beard is right. And the chest is just extremely wide. I know that's how most of the characters were drawn in the show, but this is a little bit overdone, I believe. Especially coupled with the spindly legs. It doesn't stand very well, and that's why it's at the back of the shelf. Next up, we have yet another Jon Stewart, the third and final Jon Stewart of this shelf. This is the DC Universe Classics Jon Stewart, and it's a great likeness to John in the comics. Perfect skin tone, in my opinion. The hair looks great. The costume looks great. The green color is a little bit muted. That could have been done a little bit better. But overall, this is one of my favorite Jon Stewart figures in my collection. It's not the favorite, though. That'll come later on in the video when I highlight a couple lanterns and flashes that aren't on this shelf. Next up is Green Lantern Sodom Yacht. This is the DC Universe Classics one. I'm not super familiar with Sodom. But one of the coolest things about him is that he's a Daxamite, the same species as Mon-El, and they're an offshoot species of Kryptonians. So this is a Green Lantern with all the powers of Superman. Very cool concept, but I do wish he got more exposure, and I wish I could learn more about him. Next up is the Injustice 2 Flash. This is Barry Allen, of course. He was, I believe, the only Flash seen in Injustice besides Eobard. And I think this is a great translation of his costume from Injustice 2. It'd be cool to see an Injustice 1 or Injustice comic book-based Flash, but this is good for what it is right now. Next up is the Mattel DC Multiverse Jessica Cruz Green Lantern. This figure is pretty close to perfect in my opinion. I believe it's the only Jessica Cruz we have in 1/12 or 1/10 scale, and they just did an amazing job. Really good likeness to the character, really nice green and black. I think it's perfect, and that's surprising to say because Mattel didn't do a whole lot of perfect figures in those final waves, but this one takes the cake for sure. Next up is the McFarlane Multiverse version of Alan Scott, the first Green Lantern. This figure looks good when you're just looking at it, but when you dig a little bit deeper, it's kind of weird. So Alan being the first Green Lantern is an older guy. This is a really young facial structure, and which works good for the Earth 2 New 52 version of Alan Scott. But classic Alan Scott, I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense. Alan Scott's also left-handed, and the Green Lantern ring should be on his left hand, not his right. So they definitely could have done that better. But just looks-wise, this is the best looking Alan Scott I have. Next up is Godspeed. Of course, this is the McFarlane Multiverse version of that. Again, I believe it's the only 1/12 scale or 1/10 scale Godspeed that has been released, and I don't think they could have done any better on this. It's a perfect translation of him from the comics. I think it could even work well in a CW display if that's something that you're interested in. But this is great. This is probably the only Godspeed anybody will ever need in their collection. Next up is the Batman costume Young Barry from the Flash movie. This figure itself is great. It's a good translation of what we saw in the movie. Unfortunately, the movie itself and this design just isn't that good. So, I mean, it translates well to figure form. It's cool looking, but definitely, as a Flash fan, was disappointed with the direction they took this iteration of the character in the movie. Next up is the main Barry Allen from the Flash movie. This looks great. The candy red, shiny, all the punched in basketball texture detailing is incredible. The Ezra Miller face isn't great. I mean, you can still see him, but that could have been done a little bit better. But overall, this has a really high shelf presence, and it's one of the best looking Flashes in McFarlane's line so far. Next up is the death metal version of Jay Garrick. Now, say what you will about that story. I know a lot of people weren't a fan. I really enjoyed it, and it gave us some insanely cool alternate costumes for the Flash family, a lot of which are coming up right now. But this is a really cool Jay Garrick. Definitely not my favorite design for him, but they made it look great in 1/10 scale. Next up is the Page Punchers Flash. This figure looks great for what it is. Unfortunately, it doesn't come from anything save the comic that it comes with in the box. What I think of it as is an armored Bart Allen. Since he didn't get a death metal costume, that's kind of what my thought process is for this Flash in my display. Next up is the Death Metal Kid Flash, or as I like to call him, Ace West, so as not to confuse him with Wally. This is great. I love the gray and black. It's a nice callback to the future version of Wallace that gave the main Wallace his powers during that Future Flash storyline early on in the New 52. So it's a really cool callback to that. I think it would be even cooler if he kept this costume, but it doesn't look like he has going forward. Next up is the Death Metal Barry. This figure is really good, really great articulation. This is a really oddball design. Definitely not my favorite when it comes to the death metal designs. Black and red works good on Flash, but I think he should have definitely had sleeves. That would have worked better, kind of tied him in with the black Flash, since he's become that before. But overall, it's a really nice figure, and I definitely am happy to have it. Next up is the Death Metal Wally. This is the Wally West with the powers of Dr. Manhattan. Flash looks great in blue. Wally's my favorite Flash. This is an incredible figure. It definitely could be updated with that new Barry body they have, but since this is more of a niche design for Wally, I don't think they'll be redoing this at any point in the near future, but maybe eventually we'll get this on a nicer body. Next up is the classic Jay Garrick by McFarlane. This is a super nice figure. I love the colors on it. Orange could be a bit more red, but maybe that's just the camera washing out the color. I personally prefer my Jay Garrick to be Old Man, but we already have a lot of Old Man figures in 1/12 and 1/10 scale for Jay Garrick, so it's super nice that this is more of a younger iteration of him from the 1940s, 50s, so that's really nice to have. Next up is Impulse, Bart Allen, the fourth Flash. This is super nice. I had been needing an updated Impulse in 1/12 scale, 1/10 scale, since I never got the original DC Direct one. I always thought it was insanely small, even though I'm not a scale stickler. It just didn't work in this type of display at all. This couldn't have been done better, in my opinion. He's got the translucent lenses. He's got the ruby red hair. It looks great. Next up is the DC Direct Kingdom Come Wally West Flash. This is the Flash that just keeps running and can't stop. He's essentially become completely Speed Force energy. This is the DC Direct version. There's not a whole lot of articulation. It's a fairly old figure. I wish it could get into a running pose, given that he's the Flash that always runs. But maybe if McFarlane comes around and gives us an update to this, it'll be incredibly nice. But for what this is, this figure is really awesome to have. Next up is the DC Direct Max Mercury. One of the first speedsters in comics overall. He originally comes from a company called Quality Comics that got bought out by DC a long time ago, and he was reimagined as Max Mercury. He's kind of the elder statesman in terms of Speed Force-based characters. He mentored Bart. He mentors really everybody that's ever had the Speed Force in terms of the hero speedsters. This figure is extremely old. I believe it came out in 2001, but it really does hold up as far as looks with the rest of these figures. Definitely could use an update with modern articulation. But as for what this is, this looks great in my collection. Next up is the Wallace West or Ace West version to Kid Flash. This is the Mattel version. I don't have the McFarlane version. I think they're pretty on par with each other. McFarlane's a little bit taller, but that didn't really matter much to me. This looks great. I don't need the update. Really nice colors, really nice head sculpt, all around an incredible figure. Next up is Kingdom Come Kid Flash. This is Iray, or Iris West II. This is Wally's daughter. This figure is essentially just a statue. It's got hip joints, but it's on a stand, so they don't really move a whole lot. But it looks great. DC Direct didn't do a whole lot of articulation in those days, and this is the only version of that character in 6 and 7 inch scale, so I'm happy to have it in the collection. Next up is Jesse Quick. This is a custom. I believe it's from Optimus Leo on eBay. I got it about a year ago. It's based on the Marvel Legends green costume Jean Grey body, not the Phoenix, but the House of X one. So it does run a little small, but again, I'm not a scale stickler when it comes to comic characters. I think it's totally okay that she's a little bit shorter than the rest of them. And it looks great. I'm not sure where this head sculpt is from. Probably another Marvel Legends character, maybe Sharon Carter, but I could be wrong on that. Overall, I think he did a wonderful job. This really looks good. Next up is the Flashpoint Barry Allen. This body for Flashes is perfect. I think they ought to do a Wally on this body. Do a couple different variations of Barry. The head sculpt is really nice. Can also be used for Aquaman if you like a more short-haired Aquaman. Red is super nice. Boots are great. I don't have the masked head on him. It's packed away somewhere. But I really like this unmasked head. So that's what's staying on him for this display. Last up in terms of 6-7-inch scale figures on this shelf is the Rebirth Wally. This was the Walmart exclusive McFarlane Multiverse. I think this looks great. Again, it could be updated on the newer Barry body, but Wally's my favorite Flash. He's the fastest Flash, so he goes right in the front next to Barry. Next up, most of my friends who've seen my collection know I like to keep a joke character on most of my shelves. So Buzz Lightyear is that character for this shelf. This happens to be the Bandai model kit version, which I think is the best Buzz Lightyear for this scale overall. Last but certainly not least, to close out this shelf are my 3 Flash Lego minifigures. We got Jay Garrick, Barry Allen, and Jesse Quick. These look great. I think they're perfect. It is older Jay Garrick. Jesse's got more red hair than the custom figure I have. I think this is a CW Barry. I'm not certain on that. I got it loose, so I'm not too sure. There are a couple other Speedsters and Lantern characters in my collection that I'll briefly touch on here shortly. But this is the Flash and Green Lantern shelf. If you want to know any more information or see the rest of the shelves as to where the next couple characters come from, drop that in the comments below. On Lex's Legion, I have a custom The Rival. This is Jay Garrick's Reverse Flash, custom painted by my wife. On Alex's Legion shelf, I have the McFarlane Reverse Flash. I think of this as Hunter Zolomon. I have a custom painted Inertia done by my wife as well. There is the DC Direct Essentials Sinestro. There's the McFarlane Multiverse Emerald Knight Power Ring. And then there's the DC Direct New 52 Johnny Quick. And back there in the back is the DC Direct Arkillo. Over on the JSA shelf, you have the DC Universe Classics versions of Alan Scott and Jay Garrick. Swinging around to a mishmash shelf of Superman, John Jones, and a couple Marvel characters. This is the New 52 DC Direct Barry Flash. This shelf is a Versus display of a couple different DC rivalries. That's the Angry Face McFarlane Flash. And then there's the DC Direct Essentials Eobard Thawne Reverse Flash. On the Titan shelf, I have the Mattel version of the Rebirth Wally. This one's hair is kind of weird. It kind of looks like a carrot, but I'll go into more depth when I get to this shelf in the Shelf Spotlight series. Finally, on the Justice League shelf, I've got the DC Direct Essentials Barry, the DC Direct Jay Garrick back there in the back, and then the DC Direct Alan Scott Green Lantern. And finally, hiding back behind Doomsday is the NECA John Stewart and the McFarlane Multiverse Parallax Hal Jordan. Those two will get more highlights when I do the Shelf Spotlight for the Versus display. Same goes for the Eobard and the Angry Barry. Then there's the DC Direct Essentials Hal Jordan Green Lantern, the DC Direct Jade back there, and the McFarlane Injustice Reverse Flash. So overall, I hope you liked this first iteration of the Shelf Spotlight series. This one covered the Flashes and the Lanterns again, of course. If there's any other shelves in the display that you'd like to see me highlight quickly, I can definitely do that. My next plan is the Justice Society shelf, so I definitely am looking forward to that one. Thank you. Have a great day. May the Force ever serve you.